All right, everybody, welcome back to Burt's Basics, Medical Anatomy and Physiology map classes. I hope these videos are helping you out, and I'm really glad that you're taking the time to look at them. So today we are doing concepts 4 and 5, which is directional terminology and all the anatomical planes. So let's get this out of the way with the start. Okay, these are the things that you got to know. You got to know all these terms. So at the end of this little video, you're gonna have a quiz on all of them, and I hope you get them. So just know that even though that you might be stressing right now at the beginning of map class, these terms are going to come back to haunt you later. So if you don't want to get kicked in the face later, kind of step up your game right now. The first thing we have to do is, besides this muscle man looks very angry, this is going to be the answer to almost every test question. What he's standing in right now is called anatomical position. So if you get any questions on the test, like what is superior of, what is lateral of, what is distal to, you have to stand like this, because if you put your hand like this, you're going to get it wrong, because that's not anatomical position. So anatomical position is your arms out, your thumbs extended, standing straight up, okay, feet a little bit apart. This is anatomical position. So just kind of make sure we get that down pat. So as we go through these, every diagram I show you, notice they're standing in anatomical position. So let's go ahead and start with planes. So if I backtrack for a second, these are the planes that you're supposed to know. Now, a plane is used to divide the whole body into pieces. And so if we look at them, these are the major planes you have to know. Everyone always asks you, well, let's start with the pink plane, purplish periwinkle in the middle of the body. That is called the mid-sagittal plane. A sagittal plane is a plane that cuts the body into left and right halves. Now, a good question is, how many sagittal planes can you have? And what's the difference between sagittal and this word, which is mid-sagittal? So let me kind of show you a picture just really quick, and we'll talk about sagittal first, then we'll go on the rest. You guys have seen sagittal your whole life in almost every science class you've ever seen. This is a picture of the brain, okay? And the brain is cut, okay, right down the middle. And that's the sagittal plane. Now, the whole thing about sagittal is it cuts the brain into left and right halves. So if you look at my body in the webcam up here in the top corner, you can see if I'm cutting a body into left and right half, this is called sagittal, 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 until I get right smack dab in the middle. And that's called a mid-sagittal plane. So if you look at the purple one, that's called a sagittal plane. It just divides the body into left and right halves. You can have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of sagittal planes, but you can only have one mid-sagittal plane that cuts the body into half. Okay, so that is called the mid-sagittal. So what I have here on the skull is, every time I do this, you guys know that there's sutures. And if you look at these sutures, people know that's where, it's the parietal bone. It's the parietal bone. When babies are born, they're atrocious and ugly and have that cone head. Those bones are going to eventually form a fibrous joint and suture there. And that suture, if you notice, oh, it's off your screen. Dang it. Let me see if I can get it on the screen for you. There you go. If you notice, that suture in red is called the sagittal suture. Now, if you're kind of paying this video, you should be like, well, why isn't it called the mid-sagittal suture? Oh, it's simple. It's not always in the center. So let's go to my next one now. So the next one is the one in turquoise. This is called my frontal coronal plane. I would memorize both of those as well. Now remember, a sagittal cuts me into left and right halves, whereas a coronal cuts me into a front part and a back part. So you got to know those ones as well. So let's take a peek at that. So let's go to coronal. So if I have a coronal cut, that cuts me into a front and a back. Mid-sagittal cut me into two symmetrical halves. Coronal and frontal planes will never do that. So if you can look, here's a brain cut in half. You can see the frontal or coronal section of the brain is way different looking than the mid-sagittal cut of the brain. Almost every diagram we tend to use is a mid-sagittal cut. The last plane you need to know is one that cuts us into a top half and a bottom half, and that is called a transverse plane. So if we look at a transverse, some people call it horizontal, which works for me. That is cutting across, so you have a top portion and a bottom portion. And this is an MRI of someone who had a transverse MRI section, and you can see the brain tumor. Now, if we put all three of these together, you can see how amazing medicine can be. You can have a sagittal section of the brain, you can have a transverse section of the brain, and you can have a coronal or frontal section of the brain, and you can get so much information. So just kind of get used to those words. Now let's go to the rest of our words. These are the other words we have to know. They're all directional terminologies, and know them well. I'm going to go a little fast here, but like I said, you have detailed notes, and you can come ask me anytime you want. So let's go and start with these guys. Superior and inferior. They always come in tag teams. So once you learn one, you got to learn the other. Superior is going up. So if you think of your superiors above you, okay, inferior is going down. Now you're like, oh, that's easy. I don't think you realize how much we're going to use these. When we talk about blood flow through the heart, we're going to talk about these big old veins that come back to the heart. The problem is they're both called vena cava, but there's one above the heart, up, that's superior, and there's one below, so you can see you got your superior and inferior vena cava. So if we go back, superior and inferior, check off our list. Let's do these ones now. If you look at the side of the body, anterior means to the front, and posterior means to the back. Now we're going to add ventral and dorsal to these as well in the next video, but anterior is in the front and posterior is in the back. Okay, and before I show you a picture of this, let's go over to these guys as well. If you look in the middle of our torso, you got medial and lateral. Medial is whenever I'm approaching the midline of the body. That's medial. Whenever I'm going away from the midline of the body, that's called lateral. Now in class, I'm going to show you a picture like this, and people are going to freak out and be like, oh, it's so complicated. Not really, because if you look, check out this ligament, which connects bone to bone in the front of the knee. That's called my anterior cruciate ligament, which we commonly call your ACL. Now, if you look at the one in the back, that's called your posterior cruciate ligament, which is your PCL. If you look at the one in the middle of your knee, like the inside of your knee, okay, that's called your medial, okay, collateral ligament, which should be right there, MCL right there. And if you look on the one on the outside of your knee, that's called your LCL, which is your lateral collateral ligament. We'll talk about the C's in class. But if you look at these, if we go back, M, L, A, and P are the 4 ligaments of your knee, and you just rocked them out. The next one we're going to do is proximal versus distal. I always tend to use proximal and distal mostly on the limbs of the body, the arms and legs, but there are different places we can use them. If you look at proximal's definition, it says closest to point of attachment. So we look at this girl right here, see the proximal's kind of cruising up towards her arm? It attaches right here. So I call this body, the main part of our body, the trunk. So the proximal is going up my arm towards the trunk of my body. The opposite of proximal is when I'm going away from my body towards my fingers and my toes. And we call that distal. So you can see distal down here on the legs. The easiest way to show you this is to show you a picture of a hand. Now if I show you this hand, a lot of people freak out because they're like, oh, look at all those bones. But remember, distal are the names of the bones farthest away from the body. So these that I'm touching are my distal phalanxes. Guess what we call these phalanxes or phalanges that are closest to the body? Those are called proximal. So proximal and distal also argue. New word this year. New word that we haven't had in a while, which I'm actually pretty excited about. Sorry if I'm making you go dizzy. The last one we have is superficial versus deep. I'm guessing you probably already know what that is, but I got some pictures just to guide you on your way. Superficial is on the surface of. Deep is deep. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you a picture of this so you can kind of see superficial versus deep. In class, we're probably only going to tackle the superficial muscles, the ones on the surface of. But if we move like my pectoralis major and my deltoid and my biceps and my triceps, then you have all these secondary muscles or deep muscles, the ones that are underneath it. I thought this lifeguard mannequin cut in half was kind of interesting. Superficial infection is on the surface of the body. Deep is within. Well, guys, that is all the directional terminology you need. So go ahead and do your review quiz. Answer every letter possible. And go ahead and pause the video here and bring me in the letters. And then after this slide is your answer key. And I hope you enjoyed Burt's Body Basics on directional terminology and anatomical planes.